Okay, once again, thanks very much for everybody joining today for our webinar around advances in service management. And we have a very busy schedule today, so I won't spend a lot of time. Just to kick off things, really just to welcome you all and thank you for joining, as I say, and to give you, first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. We will be recording this session today. And making available that recording and a PDF of the slides for all of you that have opted in for further communications. That information of where to find the recording and the PDF will be sent to you via email at the post event. One other key point is we will be running a quick Q&A, a question and answer roundtable at the end of today's webinar. So if you do have any questions for our panelists, please could you enter them in the Q&A section of Zoom. Now that can be found in your Zoom window in the bottom center. We will be directing all the Q&A questions for everyone in that Q&A tab. So, right, let's kick things off. One other key thing I do want to say to everybody is that it's a massive thank you to all of our sponsors of our base program. It is there through their sponsorship, and many of them are presenting as panelists today and subject matter experts. But it's through their sponsorship that make all of these webinars free of charge for you as attendees to join, as well as a number of our face-to-face events, including things such as our Broadband Summit, our virtual Broadband Summit, which is kicking off just in a couple of weeks' time. So please keep your eyes open for registration information for that at the end of this webinar. Right, so let's kick off and talk about the subject matter itself. I'm lucky to be joined today by a number of people representing key influences from the vendor community in the service management and the service experience of customers within the service provider broadband community. They are Carlos Santos, the Executive Head of Products for Europe for K-On Broadband. Grigor Demic, Solution Architect and Product Owner at Axiros. Jithan Mutu of Incognito, Director of Product Management at Incognito. And last but not least, Stephen Offran from F-Secure, who's the Vice President of Portfolio Management there at F-Secure. So today's webinar, as I said, is around advances in service management, and it's really going to be focusing on some key areas such as service performance, end-to-end user experience, the over-the-top service data modeling and testing. What is the service provider smart home service delivery opportunity and how to recognize and monetize that smart home opportunity. And then around the assuring of security all the way to the device, including across the Wi-Fi. So generally speaking, in a market that is keen to demonstrate service differentiation and introducing new monetized services, advances in service management is absolutely key in recognize that monetization of new service opportunities. So with no more ado, I'm going to pass it straight over to Carlos, who today is going to be talking in regards to AX OTT real user experience and end-to-end network performance in the fixed and mobile access networks. Carlos, over to yourself.
Thank you, Craig. As always, thank you also to the Broadband Forum for hosting and obviously for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to participate in the events and with a special talking on one of those events. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to all the attendees. It's definitely a pleasure to see a big list of participants and also to the partners, which some of them will talk today, and to which without them, what we will be talking today was not possible. So, with no delays, we will focus today on USP and on my side, focusing on the broadband domain. Definitely cover more at the CPE sites, but as I said, it's an end-to-end story, and hopefully by today's session or today's webinar, we will see the big picture all together, and we will obviously covering all the questions that pop up. So kicking off, a quick update on KM Broadband for those that do not know the company. Obviously, our HQ is based in Seoul, South Korea. We are public listed. Recently, quite happy to open our R&D center also in Europe, where we are pretty much boosting our R&D part. So key figures from 2021. Also for your interest, the main message here is that we keep strong despite of the pandemic situation. Our capacity of production is increasing every year, and we are actually expanding that capacity to be more close to the European market, which obviously I represent here today. We keep strong on our employee score, and as you can see, 65% is R&D based, which obviously translates into all of the business areas that we participate. So here we represent 3 different domains. First of all, the video part across different categories. Obviously, the broadband segment, where we are pretty much driving this concept of open platform standardization and ecosystem, which is extremely important, and also part of what we are discussing here today. And the third element to glue all of these together related to the platforms and solutions, and with I believe a topic that will become hopefully one of the topics to be discussed inside the broadband forum, the metaverse. Yeah, so all of these makes KM a cross-category partner, and today we will be very happy to address USP. So setting up the scene in terms of what is actually the real scope of what we are talking here today. Point number 1 is, and I believe everyone agrees with this statement, a home network or the in-home connectivity is becoming more complex. We are seeing an addition of multiple connected devices, such as smart TVs, set-top boxes, IoT devices, and others. And on top of that, users just want it to work as easy as turn on the light switch, right? So secondly, gateways are no longer a black box. More and more services are using these connected devices, including home security, automation, again, OTT services and others, right? So, and what we are also seeing at the same time, because this is, growing, we are starting to see an overlapping of services. Yeah, so these services, they use the same connected devices, and they are increasing the complexity specifically on the permission and the privacy of the end user. So today, we will examine the trends that enable the shift to service-based models on the CPE devices. Today, we will be more focused definitely on the CPE side. And we will also describe the challenges that are affecting this transition, right? So additional to that, we are also presenting, pretty much an open source complete solution for building this services ecosystem on the CPE devices as a unified and standard solution that can pretty much be deployed in any hardware platform. And that is the core in terms of standardization and in terms of building the ecosystem. We will present the main components. I think it's very important. And we also discuss how they enable operators to step into what we believe to be a new operating model based on creating, as Craig mentioned in the beginning, this ecosystem of revenue generating services, while running, as always, in the standardized and universal platform. And this is extremely important because this is linked to what Broadband Forum also defines in terms of standardization. So let's look to the challenges, right? So hopefully by the end of these slides, I will provide the answers, but let me start with a question. So from a theoretical viewpoint, right? So serving diverse on-demand applications from devices that are usually deployed in the home of those users, this actually seems like a logical move, right? It is a logical move for operators. I think the question here is, why hasn't this been done so far? Why now, right? So as I mentioned, we have identified several key technology advancements and trends that facilitates, creating these service-based ecosystems on CPEs. But we also identified, what are the challenges for operators. So starting with the key technology advancements that are allowing this to happen now. First one is obviously the hardware, right? So we are seeing with the new generation of architectures, a multi-core system on chips that enable and make it possible to run multiple operations at the same time. We are also seeing that, these what we call Linux distributions or embedded Linux distributions, especially on the legacy devices, we had to run, a specific purpose operating system to remain efficient, right? So with these Linux CPEs benefits that we are seeing now, we are getting a more efficient stack, but also at the same time enabling new use cases. Third element is the evolution of containerization solutions. So containers have actually revolutionized the way, operators are developing, the way third-party entities are delivering services, are testing services, and making all of those applications secure. So today we will not touch about security. That will go for another, hopefully broadband forum webinar. But on these embedded systems, containers do enable developers, pretty much to decouple applications from the hardware stack, right? And this is extremely important because it provides an additional layer of protection for applications, and at the same time limits the attacking surface they expose, right? All of these benefits combine to provide, this need of security, this need of isolation for service-oriented models on the embedded system. So this is extremely important and, reflects how sophisticated these containerized solutions are becoming. The other element is related to the infrastructure, right? So advanced of new networks, for example, 5G deployments, are requiring value-added services to attract and retain customers. We are seeing operators, in demand because they can no longer wait, they can no longer base pretty much their business just on selling data packages. They cannot sustain the business by selling only voice packages. Instead, they have to start offering these value-added services to attract and retain their customers. And obviously, the last 2 points related to the increased user focus on privacy and security. So these embedded devices, such as routers or gateways, as you want to call them, are increasingly targeted and exploited by hackers. So the security services, examples, VPNs, parental controls, anti-phishing, and many others are becoming an essential and critical requirement for a large portion of these consumers. But, and now answering the question that I have raised in the beginning, operators do face legacy limitations. So one of those that we always get is definitely the vendor lock-in. So by default, the legacy devices are running a proprietary and single-purpose operating system, which makes the life of operators quite complex in terms of evolution and in terms of modification of the software. The second element is the outdated software, right? So it is a reality, and recent studies, security tests, screenings do show that that most of the devices deployed on the field are actually running outdated kernel versions. So this obviously is a risk for the security of the users. And the third element is obviously linked to the unsatisfactory user experience. We are seeing that. So we are seeing, as I was saying in the beginning, users wanting to use those services as, as simple as turn on a light switch. So For operators staying ahead of these, infrastructure challenges, it does require the bold and strategic transition. And we also need operators to step in to make this a reality. So the only way, obviously, for operators to regain the ability to control, extend, and secure the software, right, running on these CPEs is through an open standard software. This is a reality. This is what we are seeing in the market. And this is what we are also doing, not only inside Broadband Forum, but also outside, or, through different working groups. As for example, one of them, for example, Purple. By using this open standard software to build this, let's call it CPE software, operators can break their dependency on the silicon manufacturers, obviously, and start redesigning this value chain, right? So starting to deliver services on top of these applications. Once again, 2 dimensions, very simple standardization across an ecosystem built with the introduction of this service orchestration and enablement of this, big application space. And here you can actually see some examples. Going a little bit into the details, because today, time is short, but I think it's important to at least give you an idea that what we are talking here, it is a reality. It does exist. So when it comes to lifecycle management, from our perspective, and keep things a little bit simple, it consists in 2 major components, right? The first one is what we call the cloud component, that can pretty much act as a server side and provides, all the necessary environment for the lifecycle management, such as, for example, the containers or the different applications, or even remote management, CWMP, for example, for all of these. So this is one side of the equation. The other side is actually the CPE. So the CPE components resides on the CPE, obviously, and provides what we call an ecosystem that allows these container applications from the CPE side. So here, this is the introduction to the OB USP agent, and it pretty much correlates with the lifecycle management controller and the lifecycle management agent. So they remotely, as you can see in this picture, remotely communicate via the USP protocol. So it's a predefined protocol, and once again, depending on the controller, that protocol can be different, but all supported as part of this standardization. And all of these is using very, standardized communication, well-defined in specific data models, right? The data model describes the different CPE components, such as network, such as processes, memory, different services. All of these are manageable in the same manner, right? So we are not reinventing the wheel here. The data model contains, obviously, a predefined mapping for lifecycle management, enabling a standardized approach for implementing the communication, once again, between the controller and the agent. And this is the beauty of USP agent as a standard, right? So it allows you out of the box to pretty much enable this type of control, this type of managements. Lifecycle management implementations definitely feature USP agent, and once again, according to the well-defined OB USP reference implementation. It's important also to say, that the picture is not completed, and actually inside our architecture, we have introduced a translation layer. We call it actually the container management daemon. So it is pretty much, a daemon that runs in the background and allows to perform the basic operations such as monitoring, installing, upgrading, and uninstalling containers. So the beauty of this architecture is that it's also a multi-tenant, right? So you can have on the cloud sides, not one, but multiple instances, each one of them responsible for a domain, for example, monitoring, control applications, a store for those applications. So all of this is applicable, and as part of this dynamic architecture that we are presenting here today. Again, this is just an example, and it's part of our solution as we have implemented with some of the partners identified in the presentation. So looking into the use cases, right? Because this sounds not new, right? What is new is actually what we are putting out on the field. And for that, obviously, the partnership that we have created is key. Why? Because it brings scale, right? And what we are seeing now is that the CPE, as I was saying, no longer a black box, is now bringing all of these application stores to the end user. It can be obviously delivered via the web UI, or it can be delivered via an application that communicates with the CPE. And all of that independent of what you are seeing from the core side, right? So just to complete the full picture here, the lifecycle management, and this is the way we see moving forward, the lifecycle management solutions, it does use cutting edge open standard technologies. Once again, it's no proprietary, to enable flexible and seamless application lifecycle management. This is extremely important. That's why I'm going a little bit in pause here. By providing the tools to deploy, isolate, monitor, and manage all of those services. This is what we are seeing in demand as part of this open source, as part of this standardization, and align with all the partners that we are working together. On the CPE devices, this lifecycle management delivers as well an integrated piece for carriers to embrace this new operating model, centered definitely on creating ecosystems of revenue generating services. This is extremely important for operators, and operators can do this without making large investments. Lifecycle managements leverage the open standards in a way that it will lower the CapEx requirements, in the way that will lower the OpEx investments needed to deliver new services to the customers. To complete the presentation, and then obviously handing over to Gregor, the adoption of this service orchestration is the natural next step. And Kayon is hopefully the right partner to walk you through this path. Happy to take the questions offline. Thank you so much. And I hand over now to Gregor.
Okay, many thanks, Carlos. I hope that all of you can see my screen. Yeah, as I said, many thanks to Carlos, and in this presentation he gave, I will basically continue on top what he was talking, but I will talk much more about USP and Broadband Forum standards, but not only those, other industry standards as enablers for solution design and solution implementation, where we in Axiros accomplished something what we call the over-the-top real user experience and end-to-end network performance monitoring in fixed networks, but also in the mobile access network, so targeting the converged operators. I would also like to say thanks to all participants which joined this webinar, but also big thanks to our hosts at the Broadband Forum. So let me start with the very short introductions about me. I am solution architect and the product owner at Axiros. I am involved in solution and product life cycle, so starting from the design through development, and finally in the end integrations and deployment of different kind of the solutions. My core background is coming from the network monitoring, both on the mobile and fixed network. So for today, I will talk on top of what Carlos was already introduced. I will talk about service management, more specifically targeting the end users and over-the-top services. I will do very short introduction of what is considered as OTT from our industry verticals and our markets. A little bit about solution, how we design it, and then standard procedures which we basically leverage and utilize as is infrastructure for, in the end, better proactive testing and monitoring of the fixed and mobile networks. So with rise of the OTT, which is happening in the last about 10 years, we see basically that a lot of different over-the-top players come to the market offering end-user services, utilizing basically provider network just as a pipeline, as a data pipeline for many kind of the different services, and of course monetizing those services. So that basically left a lot of providers with a bitter feeling, since the network itself is a crucial part and infrastructure for these services, but and also main impactor on the quality of these services. So a lot of different areas in terms of the net performance is considered here as mandatory for over-the-top services. There are multiple ways of classifying what kind of the OTT services there are on the market, but common understanding is that we divide them on the type of the service, going into the messaging service, so communication applications, then the streaming one, including video and audio streaming. Here, the top players are Netflix, YouTube, etc. Then voice services, so any kind of the voice service over IP, low-level implemented voice over IP, or some advanced services which use similar streaming protocols like WhatsApp, Viber, etc. All of this basically reflects to the end user some kind of the experience, which makes those users aware how good or bad the service is, and blaming in the end the network. So customer impact is a huge. Customers and users are basically reflecting the OTT performance and their experience, how they are experiencing the apps with network performance, which is main contributor to customer satisfaction scores. With that in mind, there is a big shift in network providers space to go from the network-centric approach in determining, quantifying, qualifying user experience from the low-level area, from the network-centric approach. So looking at the metrics and KPIs from the access network, transport, or core network. It is shift going through the OTT services and quality of experience defined in the nutshell how end users see these. Here in this pyramid, we can see basically those relationships. Now we are more about the user-centric approach, quality of experience management systems are becoming more and more important. And the top to the bottom approach, which we can see in this pyramid, is becoming de facto standard in the terms of quantifying and qualifying network performance and end user experience. But as you are aware, there are many different challenges which are involved in this. So baseline is there is a lack of holistic end-to-end view of the customer experience across the network. There are many multiple factors in the communication context which are heavily affecting both end user, the consumer of the service in the end feel. So there are processes and tools. Then we are talking also about the device access networks, from Wi-Fi to LTE, 5G, fixed wireless access networks, etc., transport core, and of course the OTT services itself on the app side, but also on the internet on the backend side. And then there is also the nature of the user application, or OTT. It's very important in the way how the network can reflect to that experience of the OTT, and how the OTT can actually introduce problems, issues, and impact on the network itself. That makes all of this, well, very painful process and procedure to improve. Because there is too much data to collect, process, and correlate across a different protocol stacks, across a different type of devices, and on, of course, different parts of the network, looking from the network from top view, so from the access, transport to the core. There are also many dispersed tools for network management and monitoring actually available in market, making even more hard to aggregate, to correlate all of this data. And OTT services are not under any kind of the control of a network provider. So that makes it too many different technologies, too many different tools and applications, so no single source of truth between network divisions. And of course, lack of end-to-end view on the real customer experience. So the question is, what kind of the data we do have? How we do collect that data? How we actually are giving the context to the data and doing some let's say, more advanced analytics on top of the data to quantify and qualify end user experience, and of course, to troubleshoot the network and to make changes to optimize the network, which reflects to that end user experience. So with that in mind, we can go to the solutions, more specifically to the what kind of the data we are passively and actively looking at. These are basically the data models which we reflect to the TR standards, to the bulk results, etc. So here we can start with the passive data sources from targeted device, and these device can come our end user consumer devices, so mobile phones, Windows devices, Linux, whatever. So first, locations. Location can be very important in multiple use case implementation. Then, of course, radio network stats. So this is 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G alternative to Wi-Fi scan. So basically physical layer on the access network side. There we are getting signal identity. We are also having a network traffic stats, so basic information about interfaces, transmit, receive bytes, packets, etc. And of course, other system apps and stats which are available on the system itself. We do also run against industrial type of devices, having end-to-end data sources in multiple points in the network. So we are basically targeting rooted in and industrial user equipment devices, where we are doing TCP/IP level of tracing, which gives us a lot of parameters and KPIs for end-to-end troubleshooting and analysis. Depending, of course, on the network, what kind of the network is, and what kind of the access network, to be more precise. If it's a mobile network in a question, so 3G, 4G, 5G, in those cases, we are targeting advanced user equipment traces and cell traces to get the physical layer. And if you are talking about Wi-Fi access technologies, then in that case, we are targeting via TR and USB standards. We are targeting the CPS itself. If we go into the active side, so if we talk about active testing here, there are multiple ones. So there are standardized TR143, then vendor-specific, our vendor-specific single and multi-socket speed tests, YouTube native and abandoned OTT tests, YouTube catalog tests against YouTube services, then Netflix speed tests against Netflix CDNs, very advanced web browsing tests, which we will also put a little bit more in a detail later. Latency tests, trace routes, so basically the BusyBox network kind of the tests. And more interesting lately, interactivity tests targeting the gaming services, etc. And the solution itself, this is a generic overview. So we did have various implementations. The yellow outliners are basically the targeted data sources, either passive or active, via broadband forum standards or via custom ones. So here we can see on the left side, on the client side, collections of different metrics coming from the SDKs and applications itself on the final devices. Then, of course, via standard broadband, via broadband standards like TR and USP targeting the CPs, access points, etc. Custom ones for advanced network side monitoring, and of course, test servers itself, including the DPI traces. All of that basically is crunched, so that's the way how we are getting the all needed data for advanced analytics. All of that is crunched and post-processed for final reporting and real-time qualification of end user experience. So now let's go into the some of the standards and procedures outside of the broadband forum TR and USP definitions, which we utilize to give a more specific use case implementation for these active tests. So first one, web browsing. Here we basically leverage W3C performance resource timing standards. So we do extract this information and apply it to data model from the browsers itself. So all popular browsers implements the standard, and we are simply mapping the KPIs to the data model, which we basically later fetched via our monitoring solution. Here, you can clearly see that it's not only that we are measuring the network side of the story, we have also the application processing and triggering side before the network stuff happens. Then network milestones like TCP, SSL handshakes, time to first bytes, time to last bytes, etc. But what is also very important, we can see here the time which needs for the website to render on the device itself, and all other cross requests against additional hosts for the specific web page. For more information, you are more than free to see the implementation on W3C web pages. In the case of the voice, this is example how we are basically leveraging on top of ITU-TG 107 E model, which is basically parametric-based mean opinion scoring for voice over IP services. Here we are basically producing based on the end-to-end data, like jitter, packet loss, and latencies. We are able to produce mean opinion scores. The example about applications, we are tracing, for example, WhatsApp originated and terminated call. So having the two devices talking with each other, and with those as data inputs, we are able to create our value for a model and create mean opinion score. Here on this image, you can clearly see how packet loss is impacting the model itself, basically reflecting the end user experience for that specific voice session. Yeah, so needed traces are either from Collier or Collie. In any case, if there is only one, we are able to produce a score. If you're having a both, then the score is having additional values in it and more precise estimations. For video streaming performance, there we are leveraging on top of the ITU-T P1203. This is basically parametric bitstream based quality assessment. There are three different releases of it, targeting different aspects of video mean opinion scoring. So we are here utilizing the 1203, which is video quality estimation module per 1 second output information. So there, the final output is 1 to 5 score mean opinion score based on the ITOT P910. Application areas are progressive download and adaptive bitrate stream. Basically, most of the OTTs are utilizing those. Also, the IPTV ecosystems are also mostly based on adaptive bitrate streams. So OTT service or operator managed stuff via this protocol. So it could be real streaming or HTTP streaming or Apple-specific one, HLS, etc. And of course, it's agnostic to a container format. On the device side, PC, TV, mobile phones, or are basically the targeted systems. Yeah, this is basically the events which model is using to quantify and qualify end user experience and give you the final mean opinion score for such service. And finally, yeah, you have a chance here to see on what kind of the data we are working on. You understand that there is many different type of the metrics coming from the physical layer, from the access network to the end-to-end data, and then finally what end users are actually consuming on the phones and can see on their devices. All of that, there are many dimensions, and the context of that big data needs to be more precise to quantify and qualify. Therefore, I will shortly talk about proactive testing and monitoring. First, saying about how it used to be before. So with legacy analytics, mostly the service providers there, when talking about OTT, there were some kind of the context correlation with other layers, either end-to-end layer or physical layer. If there is a clear correlation, then it was basically going drilling down to the specific part of the network, to the specific technology, for example, in the mobile technologies, in terms of signal quality and coverage. If we are talking about Wi-Fi, then yeah, very similar, but talking about the interference between different channels, same channels from different access points, etc. Three approaches were used to identify the issue here. Fixed thresholds, which is basically some standard rules and rules of thumbs from industry, like 5 seconds for page load time, actually time before user abandoned the page and stop using the service. Then there is outlining the VOR samples and of course benchmarking with other either competitors or either service providers. And finally, we are moving, of course, with the development of more better analytics framework. We are moving to more advanced models. So we are taking as a features, as already said, coming from the access network, end-to-end stuff and OTT. We are now able to apply the clustering algorithms, which basically put the different KPIs and informations coming from the different layers in the context. We are working on the machine learning models for anomaly detections, which will give us capability to do advanced testing, either OTT or legacy ones like speed test when it matters, because testing when it's not needed, that utilize the network in non-meaningful way. And of course, models for scoring, like making weights on all of these mean opinion scores, providing a better understanding of where issue may lie and what are troubleshooting capabilities in the terms of identifying the problems inside of the network. So here we basically saw how we leverage and utilized different kind of the standards protocols as infrastructure as enablers for this specific vertical use case implementation, and in terms of end user experience and quantifying and qualifying end user experience. That would be all from my side. Same as Carlos, I will be available later for Q&A sessions, welcoming your questions. Many thanks.
Thanks, Gregor. Now I'd like to pass on to Jefferson from Incognito.
Thank you, Gregor. Can you all see my screen?
We can indeed.
Okay, excellent. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Jeevit Mutu, Director of Product Management here at Incognito Software Systems. So quick background on Incognito. We have been in the broadband industry for over 30 years. Our solutions include service provisioning, remote device management, monitoring, and analytics. We serve to over 200 service providers globally, from tier 0s to tier 3s, tier 4s. Our solutions are industry recognized, and we have won numerous awards from TM Forum to Leading Lights to BTRs. Our offices are spread across Vancouver, Ottawa, Dublin, and across all major markets from sales and support perspective. And also we come under Canada's largest software company called Constellation. So now that we have got the introductions out of the way, so today's webinar is focused on advances in service management. I want to take a moment to reflect on last week's BBF webinar, which was on bulk data and telemetry. The presenters there talked about TR369 and or USB being a multi-controller architecture. They talked about bulk data profile settings, in-band and out-band collections of telemetry data. That is one of the core pillars of USB, right? So the paradigm shift and improvements in how we collect telemetry data from devices. Today we are talking about smart home services, and this is the second major pillar of USB. The revenue in the smart home market is projected to reach around $126 billion this year. And the average revenue per smart home itself is projected at around $410 US. So the smart home can be split into two categories. One, the smart switches or the smart appliances, the in-home IoT devices, right? The proliferation of these IoT devices contribute to this projected revenue. But the question here remains is, how can service providers get their slice of the pie when it comes to smart home services? That's the critical question that's underpinning today's webinar. This is where we see the importance of the app-enabled gateways, right? Where USB enables launching applications, aka the services via the gateways, the routers, CPEs, in short. This requires the orchestration of the app lifecycle management, and that's what I'll be covering in details in the upcoming slides. So what are the challenges? There is a change in consumer expectations today. Consumers are expecting more than the internet access from the CPEs, like what Carlos mentioned earlier. Now, once you have identified that need, the second challenge is how to manage the virtualized services on the CPE, right? And also, most importantly, avoiding proprietary implementations. That is required to ensure you are operating in a multi-vendor environment today. As we all know, multi-vendor environment is the norm in today's age. So it's important that you stick to a standards-based solution so you're successful there. Now, moving on to what is needed, right? So now I assume that you have identified a market need. What is required to solve these challenges? You can break them into three categories. One being managing the health and life cycle of services in the gateways, right? So this is addressed through the USB's SMM or software module management. Second, you need to have an app store or an app catalog type of infrastructure to enable value-added services to your consumers. So whether these are security, parental control, or Wi-Fi optimization and other kind of service optimizations type of solutions. And finally, you need to have an ecosystem of partners composed of app vendors, OEM vendors, and controllers. So putting this in a picture, it looks something like this. The ecosystem stakeholders in smart home services. One, you have the service providers. Second, below here, you have the third-party software providers like F-Secure, who are also presenting on this panel. Domos is another example. I'll be covering a use case with Domos later in my presentation. You have the likes of Keon on the OEM side, and then finally remote device management and application lifecycle management through controllers like that of Incognito. So how does this USB software module management actually work? All right, so I want to take and walk through the spec side of the things briefly. The spec defines the data model for software modules. There are also commands to do the lifecycle management, so such as install DU. So the DU here means the deployment unit, which is your application. Aside from the install DU, you also have other commands such as uninstall, update, the full lifecycle management of these applications. Then there are also events such as the DU state change, which is sent from the CPE to the controller as a notification whenever there's a state change. You also have the concept of an execution unit or execution environment, which are the containers that are housing the application. So these could be LXC or Docker containers. Now moving on to the operator values, this approach actually avoids having an agent-based type of solution to offer new services. So here what I mean by an agent-based is having a piece of software or a service that is bundled with the gateway's firmware, right? Whereas with the SMM or the software module management approach, it actually helps decouple that service from the firmware, which brings in advantages like faster time to launch new services, updating or upgrading them independently of the firmware image, and so on. I do also want to stress the importance of the standards-based approach in here as well. Other benefits out of this approach come such as the deployment ease, resource optimization. You could have more than a single application running on a gateway, so enabling you to optimize resources accordingly as well. As we saw, USB as a multi-controller architecture. That means you could have other controllers or monitors connecting to the CPE while all maintaining the logical resource separation with the containers. I like to see things in pictures. So if you put this on a diagram here, so this is a sample orchestration architecture. On the left, you have the controller doing the app lifecycle management. So this is the device stack. So you got the hardware device, the OS, the firmware. Then you have the lifecycle management ecosystem with the number of LXC containers here. Then on the right-hand side, it could be a controller, or it could be from the same provider, or it could be multiple controllers as well that are monitoring, managing, collecting stats, and pumping into various different backends. Right. So that's in a very high level. This is the architecture for the orchestration. Earlier, I also mentioned about the importance of having an infrastructure to manage the applications, like an app store or an app catalog. What you see on the left is a representation of an app catalog, right? So here you have a number of different applications that you have verified, tested, and which you would like to deploy in your environment. On the right, you see an instance of the apps running on a particular CPE, right? So here you could actually get the stats of the applications running on the CPE, but more importantly, you could actually have this is the list of lifecycle management commands you could actually apply on the different type of applications. The key here, the differentiating factor is not only we have separated out the applications, enabling sort of like the mobile phones, right? So you're able to install and uninstall new applications. These are managed by the operator. But because it is falling within the standard, now you could do bulk operations. You could group these applications. So you could treat them just like any other set of parameters on the TR-181 data model, right? So that's the beauty here with the remote device management approach through USB. You could actually have a full control of what applications goes on what device and when they're scheduled to update and so on. So next, I want to cover two use cases. One, this is about multicast ABR for home gateway for video streaming. As you are aware, if you're familiar with the video side of the domain, for IPTV, pretty much you have ABR streams or adaptive bitrate streaming, which works great. But when it comes to in-home devices, when you have proliferation of devices streaming through that unicast ABR, it actually has a bigger toll on the network. So the solution or the answer to this question here is about going down the path of multicast ABR, where you have a single stream coming into the home, but from that entry inside the home, then you could have a unicast stream to your individual devices. So the business challenge here was about reducing the network load while increasing the video quality for all in-home devices. That would ensure reduction in rebuffering or elimination in rebuffering, a reduction in latency, reduction in lower resolutions at peak hours. So how we achieve that? So we worked with an application provider here that actually enabled a multicast ABR application that actually sat on an ONT inside the home in a fiber network. So we used USB software module management to completely lifecycle manage that application. And again, as I said, it was managed either on a per ONT basis or in bulk as well. So what are the benefits to the service provider in this case? Increased service velocity by decoupling the application from the ONT firmware, better customer experience, having multicast ABR for all in-home devices, right? The second use case, so this is the one with Domos. They are a provider out of the Nordic, an application provider. The use case is latency management and traffic prioritization. So Domo specializes in dynamic prioritization of network resources to individual applications or devices. So they do both the access prioritization as well as in-home Wi-Fi prioritization as well. So again, the use case here is to have the Domos application integrated through USB for real-time QoE control, which enabled us to prioritize applications that matters most. And also because Domos applications adhere to the USB spec, where they are actually extending the USB spec for the control of the application, we were able to provide a single pane of glass view for the operators to manage not only the CPE but also the application here, right? So not just the installation and the lifecycle management of the Domos application, but also this is where, if you go back to my diagram, you had incognito controller on the left and incognito controller on the right as well. So we are able to completely manage the application as well. So CSP benefit, provide a better customer experience. It provides an opportunity for new revenue stream. So you can actually offer packages like, higher tier packages for gaming users, work from home users, and things like that. So this is my wrapping slide. I wanted to just leave my parting comment. So keeping in mind standards-based solution. So this is key. I can't emphasize this enough. This is a non-proprietary approach, allows operators the flexibility and provides a control. Where the CPE firmware and the app are separated. The solution is available across all access technologies, whether that's 5G or cable or fiber, it doesn't matter. It increases velocity and ARPU So it's a simplified service provisioning and delivery mechanism, enables you to launch new services faster, allows you to tap into new revenue streams. Again, keep in mind about the partner ecosystem. Pre-integrated solutions will definitely help you expedite your deployment. There are different revenue sharing business models available, so which you can tap into. And again, now you can build once and deploy many times. With that said, feel free to contact us if you would like to take this further. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Stephen from F-Secure.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jivithan. And I hope you can now see my screen instead. Brilliant. Yeah, so thanks very much.
Sorry, Stephen. Sorry, Stephen,
Yeah.
not quite yet. We're not seeing your screen quite yet.
Oh, give me 1 second.
Perfect.
There we go. Brilliant. Good. Thanks so much, Jivithan, and the previous presenters, and thanks so much to everyone who's joining this webinar today, obviously, and still with us past the full hour. Just a reminder that if you do have any questions to any one of us, please pop them in the QA box as per Craig's instructions earlier. There's some really good questions already for the Q&A later that we see coming in. So yeah, I'm Stephen Offrein. I am the VP of Portfolio Management at F-Secure. And at F-Secure, we are obviously a cybersecurity company. We are the #1 in the communications service provider partner channel with over 170 service providers worldwide that we supply with our cybersecurity services that they then sell on to their consumers. We also have our own business to consumer business, or our direct B2C channel, which is of big importance to us to get a lot of learnings in straight from the end users out of the market. We have over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity, so we've been around the block for a little while. And are just in the process of becoming a completely independent company from what is our business-to-business arm at the moment. So we are splitting the company in about 2 months' time. We have a strong representation globally, historically mainly in Europe and the Nordics, but are now rapidly expanding in the Americas and the Asia-Pacific region as well. With the intros out of the way, I want to take you through a few things today. First of all, I'd like to start by sharing some insights, and then we take a look at tackling some of the problems that are there for the end users, the end consumers in the market, as well as internet service providers across the globe. If we look at some of the insights, I want to start with sharing. So we still see, obviously, consumers becoming increasingly active online. That was not just a blip that we saw at the start of the pandemic, but is still very much growing. So in joint research with one of our partners, we see the Wi-Fi usage intensifying. We see a 90% increase in Wi-Fi usage at home. 65% are now using Wi-Fi in new areas of the home as well. So rooms and spaces in the home that we didn't use Wi-Fi before, we actually see customers branching out in those areas and using more and more connected devices there. On the flip side, we also see that obviously those areas can also have bad coverage inside the home. And on the other side, on the right-hand side of the slide, we see that customers have obviously made a clear shift towards online banking and shopping, as well as online gaming. And on the flip side of that, we see an increased demand for the use of additional parental controls for families with young kids at home. With all that additional home working, we've seen a very marked increase actually in what we have dubbed digital anxiety. So we see customers working more and more from home over the past 2 years, with 58% of us now working from home at least one day a month. But those people, and that includes many of us, actually experience some form of digital anxiety and worry about online security and privacy more than people who don't work from home. So that is 67%, or 2/3 of us being worried about digital security and privacy, which is a massive number, and that is not entirely baseless, I must say, because there are many threats that can lead to us losing money or personal information, or losing our access to accounts or what have you. So digital threats are everywhere, and I won't go into detail into all of these. But obviously we have the traditional malware and ransomware, the viruses, etc., on your computer, but also things like account takeovers. So you can lose access to your Netflix account, or more worryingly, your PayPal account, or some of your corporate accounts, for example. At the same time, we also see still the rise of things like banking trojans, and even fake apps, fake Android apps, purporting as being your legitimate banking apps and snooping on your banking login details, which can cost customers very, very serious money. And then on the back of all the IoT devices that we drag into our homes, we also see many IoT device hacks, such as cameras being hacked, door locks being hacked. And whilst you can say, well, I don't really care about that, or it doesn't really matter if my camera gets hacked, there's nothing to see in my home, but actually all those hacks can also be used for other purposes. So the devices that you get inside your home, they can be used by online criminals to join botnets, for example, which is of course not beneficial to your online internet experience either, as it can slow down your connectivity. So in line with that, customers actually worry quite a bit about online security, and they are postponing smart home purchases. And as Jivithan just pointed out, the smart home market is worth $126 billion US dollars. But how much bigger could it actually be if customers were less worried about this? Because what we see is that 66% of customers are worried about their online security, and up to 48% might postpone smart home device purchases due to the security worries, and slightly more, even 51%, might postpone smart home purchases due to the privacy worries on the back of it. So there's a huge opportunity there to make customers feel more at ease, give them the peace of mind so they can actually go out and buy smart home products without having to worry about security and privacy. On top of that, like I said, we also see a marked increase for parents who want to keep their kids safe online between 2018, 2021, and we are expecting to see a further increase, obviously, this year and the following years. So things like activating content filters on the internet connection is now relevant to or wished for by 20% of parents, as well as parental controls on devices and time limits. Most interestingly, parents find checking what the children are doing online and what apps they are using, just over a quarter of parents are actually interested in seeing that. So there's a huge demand for all kinds of features and functionality that link back to security and privacy. And the great thing is that consumers really trust their internet service provider for providing these features. So 60% of consumers look at their internet service provider first and foremost to deliver all these requirements. Now, the good thing is that many of the service providers actually already plan to adopt functionality around this. So on the left-hand side, you can see the answers to a survey with regards to virtualization of services. Online privacy protection is high up in there, as well as virus or malware detection, as well as parental controls. And we see big upticks there between 2015 and 2020, obviously. And also, and that's what I'll focus on a bit more in the rest of the presentation, is actually how to deploy these on top of the CPE software, so on the home gateway, home router. So even there, IoT cybersecurity and parental controls are actually second and third most important after Wi-Fi network control and troubleshooting. And this is something that we see very, very consistently. So customers, first and foremost, want to see the Wi-Fi problem solved. They want to have whole home Wi-Fi connectivity at decent speeds in every corner of the home and garden. And on top of that, it needs to be secure. That comes immediately after. So the security side of things is paramount to customers. So what could that then look like for an end user? So really a bundle of smart and secure home Wi-Fi, plus protection on the go when customers are out and about. We'll focus on the left-hand side today. So the reliable and fast Wi-Fi component bundled with the smart home security. The smart home bit is obviously the bit that F-Secure can deliver, and the reliable and fast Wi-Fi we can work with our partners on, and you saw some of the names in the previous presentations mentioned already, as well as AirTies, of which I shared some joint research earlier in this presentation. On the smart home security front, the SDK that F-Secure has developed lives inside the router and can be deployed there in several different models, and provides everything from privacy and security, but also including parental control profiles for the devices that are being used by kids inside the home. Customers are actually willing to pay an interesting amount of money for this type of feature. Depending on geography, customers are willing to pay 6 to 11 euros a month for a combination of smart and secure Wi-Fi. So that is something to keep in the back of your head when looking at deploying solutions like this. This is definitely not a cost center. This has the opportunity to be a really great value-added service to attract and very importantly also retain customers on broadband services. As I said, solutions can be deployed in different models, and we now really see the clear shift from fully integrated solutions towards containerized solutions. Our security SDK can be delivered as an LXC container or as a Docker container, and obviously the containerization has notable upside over the fully integrated solution, such as no downtime when you deliver the service to the end user, the additional security from the isolated container, as well as, and I'll talk about that particular bit a bit more, the better lifecycle management and the ability to upgrade a container or react fast in general if and when this is needed, without the need to do a full firmware upgrade, which was needed on the left-hand side of this diagram. The next picture, like Jivitan, I also like to see a visual. So how does this, how could this work? This is an example deployment, which more or less shows what Jivitan showed you as well. So we see the operator or the service provider landscape here. We see Incognito here in this example deployment as the USB provider, and here we see the router inside the end user home, and on that router we have the TR369 agent with the container running the F-Secure Sense Security SDK, which in turn is connected to the F-Secure Security Cloud for all its knowledge and security wisdom that it uses to protect the end user. So with all these elements in place, you're now able to deliver the container onto the router. You're able to activate the service. You're able to remotely configure the service, check the status of it, etc. All from the operator's perspective, as well as give the end user a view on this as well. And this can be done either through an app that we can deploy from F-Secure side, or this can be done through the operator's management platform with a view for the end user. Something was said about open standards already, and I just want to drive that point home one more time, that the importance of all working together in this ecosystem is really to drive standardization. And we really see standardization, for example, in containerization as the rails, the foundation for fast changes. As without these standards, we will all just still be working on custom and proprietary software. But standardization really facilitates the implementation of different vendors working together on the same router platform, for example. It really speeds up the innovation. I think we're on a very exciting, I wouldn't say roller coaster ride, but definitely a very fast train ride towards really exciting services for the end user. And it's also more cost efficient ultimately for service providers deploying these services. And on top of that, using analytics really gives a lot more data to make the right decisions for the service providers in return as well. I want to finish with this slide actually, which shows two models. One with the implementation of USB and one without the implementation of USB and remote management of services in the ecosystem. And it really shows that the integration of these services and the ecosystem working well together is vital for service adoption. We support both models. So on the top model, you see a model where the service is deployed with an ACS and USB in place. And in the bottom model, there is no such thing in place, but it depends on the user activating the same service. So the service is the same, but the trigger in the top model is USB, and the trigger in the bottom model is actually the user itself having to do something. And if you then look on the right-hand side, you see a staggering difference between the service activation rates. So obviously with the top model, we get to more or less 100%, where in the bottom model, it's much harder to get to a decent rate of service activation. So really the top model, including USB, working together with the services on the router, makes providing these services to the end users and giving them the benefit of these services as easy as turning on the lights, as Carlos said in his first presentation. So that is ultimately something that we're very excited to work towards. And as with the other speakers, if you would like to find out more, please do get in touch. We have working demos of all this, even deployments already. So yeah, it's not a pipe dream. all these services are ready to go. I think with that, I'll hand over back to you, Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and thank you to all of our presenters. I think we've covered a lot of ground today and created quite a bit of Q&A activity and interest. So thank you to all of the speakers. And on that note, let me kick off the Q&A. We've got a good 10 minutes or so. So looking down the list here, I'm going to open this question first of all to Carlos, but then to the rest of the panelists as well. You talked a lot about the need for new service containers and new service offerings. But what do you as the panelists see as the new services that are most in demand by operators?
Thanks, Craig. So I was on mute. Classic, isn't it? So classic. Okay. So first of all, thank you for the question. When we look to the, inside KM, we work obviously, and we are tier operator driven. Especially I think during 2021. End of 2020, we saw a boom of interests in pretty much three main domains. The first one is linked obviously to the Wi-Fi, so the in-home Wi-Fi management capability, which obviously can be done over the CPE or can be extended using a cloud element that collects data and optimize what is happening on the premises of the customer. So definitely, Wi-Fi management being one of those pillars. The second one, it's mainly driven by cybersecurity or security, as I think Stephen pointed quite well. This is in demand. There is a concern from users. There is also a concern from operators to serve those users with these type of applications or services. And the third element is actually associated to these, and I think all of us actually touch that, and it's actually funny because it only shows that we are definitely on the same page, is related to this boom of IoT, right? So, we have multiple devices, retail devices, operator devices, but what we do not have is, an application layer, an abstraction layer that can also manage these IoT devices. So this is also being part of a service approach. Yeah, there are some partners that we are working with that are already working on this application layer to cover these IoT protocols, as an example, Z-Wave, but it's just agnostic. So I think these three and a plus one, that we are definitely seeing now, and actually Jivitan did touch that as their use case, which is the multicast part. So we are now seeing a convergency because the end users, they don't care if it is internet or if it is video, right? It's for them, it's all content, right? It's either if it's IP or delivered in any other type of format. So this capability of enhancing or optimizing the multicast transmission over to the end user is also something that we are seeing. Obviously, also from an operator point of view, because operators are concerned about the capacity, about the demands when users start to get and consume all of those content. So let's assume a 3+1, and I hope the +1 is not confusing anyone. Those are my inputs, Craig.
You've reached my mathematical abilities anyway.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other new services that are in demand that is driving this new need for software containerization? Any of the other panelists?
Yeah, sure, Craig. So if I may add, so yes, Carlos did touch on all the important ones. But for example, we are trialing with the North American operator on USB, and they've got a couple of other services there as well. And one being they're running a speed test application. right? So we know TR-143 is capable of doing speed test, but it has some limitations. So they're running another application there to do some speed tests there. So it's just that I think while these are the core ones, like the emerging trends being the security, in-home IoT security, and the network security, optimization for your applications and things like that. What USB and this whole software module management enables is actually opens up the door for any kind of application, right? I think that's the interesting space.
No, I agree with you. I think it's exciting. You've all mentioned or referred to something like a service provider app store. And I think the flexibility that it offers and the differentiation opportunity that offers is a really exciting way to really shift away from just plain old connectivity. So it's an exciting time if we can make that app store a reality for service providers, just like you get on your mobile device. I think it's really, really exciting. Any other key services? If not, I will move along quickly. I've got a question here for Gregor. We can see a very different use case outside of the classic CPE. Management and monitoring, such as mobile network monitoring. How do you see that the Broadband Forum standards, methods, and procedures are applicable to such new verticals?
Yeah, many thanks for question. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear from guys what they already show, and in context what I did show. This is the beauty of USB generic approach. I mean, with this very cool and generic architecture, we are able basically to implement many different vertical use cases, what guys already mentioned. So in our case here, we are targeting advanced data models in the terms of real user experience. Our use cases are going inside of the benchmarking of the networks, crowdsource benchmark, end-to-end troubleshooting, etc. All of that because of, I would say, pretty cool and generic architecture provided by USB.
Great. And thanks for the plug of USP, and thank you everyone for the plugs for USP. It's greatly appreciated. Stephen, question for you here. I mean, you talked about from an ISP perspective that there's the flexibility between LXC and Docker containers.
Yeah.
What would you suggest as the benefits of each approach within the CPE?
That is a really good question. As I said, we support both from F-Secure's perspective. I think if I look at the market right now, there's a slight preference for LXC. I think most of deployments are going towards that direction, and I would say it's mainly I'm not going to say dictated, but it links mainly back to the choice for the router vendor, which is the preferred version, either LXC or Dockers. From our perspective, they work just as well, so we support both.
Okay. I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, Carlos, but this is a question that came about from your session. When you're looking at growth in services, that means that we need to have, should we say, a more intelligent home gateway platform. What KPIs are you looking at that is going to future-proof that investment? It's a major investment to replace the CPE or home gateway. What KPIs are you putting in place to make sure that you don't have to replace it again in a few years' time?
I think those 10 minutes will not be sufficient, Craig. But obviously there is a concern of operators, which is now that we have a capability to deploy services, how do we make sure that the hardware can couple with all of those services, right? Because people will just be creative. A service can be anything, right? You can call, for example, a new user interface in a router a service, right? So at least on our side, and taking a little bit towards a Kayon perspective, we definitely look in terms of the architecture of the main SoC. So it's extremely important to understand understand the capability, you know, and also the, you know, the CPU power around it. So, you know, it's very associated to the type of architecture. Yeah, of course, this is not simple because it brings other challenges like type of technology, you know, 16 nanometers, 23 nanometers, and, you know, there's other consequences of all of that, like energy management. So you see, so it's not really easy, but definitely architecture and linked to the CPU capacity to deliver, you know, pretty much packets. I'm not going to say services because it looks like that it's associated to the CPU. The second element is something that is actually quite sensitive. And when I say quite sensitive, I'm definitely talking about the current situation we are living in, and it's memory, right? Specifically RAM memory. It's required to, you know, first host those containers, and when those services are delivered to the CPU, host them accordingly as a binary, right? So there is a consumption. Usually the footprints of those services are quite small, right? But, you know, if you start adding plus, and you still need to manage those services so that they do not conflict with each other, right? The equation becomes quite complex. So these are definitely the three main the two main points, you know, that we are definitely looking into it carefully. And the third part, once again, linking to a future webinar, is around the security, which is then, you know, overseen by you know, this operating system, this software kernel updated version. So all of this is definitely driving the future of these hardware platforms, and also sustaining the growth of these services accordingly. Our perspective, of course. Yeah. So this is for debates.
No, it's a good response as well. It's a hard question, so it's a good response. We are up against time, but I'm going to ask a couple more questions. If you can answer them as quickly as you may, that'd be great. Jefferson, from your perspective, you did talk in your presentation around software module management. Is there a minimum device spec that you need to have to support that software module management?
Well, that's a good question. So it does vary from applications to applications, but what we see is that typically these applications could take a toll around from 1 to 2% of the CPU, so not a lot. Roughly about 50 megabytes in terms of RAM, and about 700, 800 kilobytes in terms of storage. So I would say it does vary, but this is you could take this as a one sample size.
That's great, thank you, Stephen. Very to the point question here. Can I fix all of my security issues on the DNS layer in the network?
That's a good one. I wish it were true. No, definitely not. Short answer, I would say you can detect roughly 50% of threats on that layer, but bear in mind that is only detecting it. That is not fixing it either. So no, you need to have more, starting with maybe some stuff on the router for your whole in-home environment, and then obviously applications on devices that can run security applications like your computers and smartphones.
No, fair question, fair response. Okay, one last question, trying to share the load. Gregor, one more for yourself. What are the plans in terms of leveraging the BBF TR471 in context of advanced diagnostics?
Right. TR471 do actually reflects one of the most important KPIs if we are looking at the network as a data pipeline. So it's max IP layer throughput, and we really believe that that standard will give us more, I would say, vendor independent likeness in terms of the benchmarking cases. But it will also yield a lot of additional root cause analysis and troubleshooting use cases because it has much more advanced features than current TR-143. So we really see it as a big step forward from the active measurements point of view.
No, thank you for that. And, you know, generally speaking to all of our panelists and the companies you represent, thank you very much for the input you have in creating these open standards, driving the need. It's through companies like yourself, as well as service provider community, that is driving these open standards that you plug the importance for. So generally speaking, other than being great presenters and panelists today, thank you to your companies for what you do to the wider broadband standards across the whole global ecosystem. Thank you for that. So I'm going to close the Q&A discussion there, and I'm going to pretty much close the session. Just a quick thank you once again to all of our sponsors that makes these events possible. You can see them listed on the slides now. And then a quick promotion of our next event, which is going to be our State of Broadband Virtual Summit. We're running this from the 15th to the 17th of this month, May. 3 2-hour plus sessions, really looking at the key ecosystem discussion points, including service management and CPE device in the future of the connected user as one of the day sessions. Please do, you see the link there, or you can find it on our website to register for that either live or to download it post-event. We've got some great material coming up on those 3 2-hour sessions. Other than that, once again, thank you to all of our panelists and thank you to all the attendees that have stayed with us. It's been a great pleasure to host this webinar today. Thank you all, and thank you, and speak to you again at the State of Broadband's Virtual Summit. Take care, everyone.